This is a private conversation that I need private. I need it to stay private for now.
Christine had never thought she would be that woman who could walk away from an entire belief system, an entire way of life, and an entire future she once wholeheartedly dedicated her life to. For so long, she was that woman who stayed. She had stayed through disappointment, through emotional neglect, and through the slow erosion of a marriage that no longer nourished her heart. Christine stayed because she believed in the family she helped raise, believed in her children she loved, and in promises that once upon a time she believed were sacred. But there comes a moment in every person's life when holding on hurts more than letting go, and that moment arrived for Christine like a quiet whisper that grew louder every day. At first, she tried to ignore it. She tried telling herself she was overreacting, that every plural marriage went through seasons of imbalance, that the heartache she felt was just another challenge meant to strengthen her. But deep down, Christine knew she was living in a home where she no longer belonged. Her days were full of to-do lists and schedules, yet none of it reflected any part of the life she had envisioned. She was raising children, managing the house, showing up for this family even when she was feeling unseen. And as the years passed, that feeling of being unseen grew heavier. It wasn't one moment that broke her, it was hundreds. The nights she cooked meals without a husband coming home, the days she watched him give time and attention elsewhere while she held everything together. The conversations where she tried to express how lonely she felt, but was met with excuses, deflection, or silence. Christine began to realize that she had created a life around a man who no longer built anything with her. But the breaking point wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it wasn't even an argument. It was a moment Christine didn't expect, a moment when she realized she didn't need permission to choose herself. For so long, she believed leaving was impossible, that she had to endure, that choosing herself meant abandoning the family, that freedom was selfish. But the truth was far more simple. Freedom was survival. She didn't wake up one morning with a plan. Her courage grew slowly, like a seed sprouting in the cracks of heartbreak. Each tear watered it. Each disappointment fed it. Every time Cody dismissed her feelings or accused her of being dramatic, that seed grew stronger. Every time he withheld affection, withheld respect, withheld partnership, her courage strengthened. She began to see that the marriage she was clinging to no longer existed. Then came the moment that rewrote everything, the moment Cody admitted he wasn't attracted to her. He said it casually, like it wasn't a knife to the heart, but Christine felt it deeply, and in that moment, something inside her snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't imagining the distance. She wasn't failing. She wasn't lacking. She was unappreciated, undervalued, and unloved in the very marriage she had sacrificed her identity for. And if he no longer wanted her emotionally or physically, then what exactly was she staying for? She had begged for years for effort, for connection, intimacy that wasn't just physical, but emotional. She wanted to be chosen, not tolerated. She wanted a partner, not a critic. She wanted a marriage where she wasn't made to feel like the problem every time she asked for affection. The night she packed his things wasn't planned. It wasn't spiteful. It wasn't even angry. It was peaceful. She folded his shirts the same way she always did. She put his personal items in boxes carefully, gently, almost ceremoniously. She didn't do it because she hated him. She did it because she finally loved herself enough to stop waiting for him to change. She cleared space not just in her room, but in her life. It was a symbolic gesture, one that told the universe she was ready for something new, even if she didn't know what it would be. But when Cody showed up and took stock of what she had done, he didn't see bravery. He saw betrayal. Yet Christine saw truth. For so long, he had told the world how much he loved all of his wives equally. For so long, he acted as if the unhappiness was their own making. For so long, he clung to his control by convincing them it was all their fault. But Christine saw the pattern now. She saw how he took and took and took from them and how little he gave in return. She saw how he deployed guilt as a means of maintaining power. She saw how he doled out love as if it were some kind of privilege he granted only when it benefited him. Leaving was not revenge, nor was it punishment. Leaving was freedom. and freedom has always terrified the one who benefited from your captivity. Christine quietly began to plan her move. She was first telling her children, in tender conversations that gradually broke the news. She didn't want them to feel divided or responsible. Over and over, she made it clear that leaving their father didn't mean having to choose between parents. She wanted them to know her decision wasn't about tearing the family apart. It was about saving her heart from dying inside a marriage that no longer protected it. She started to dream again, something she had not done in years. She dreamed of mornings where she felt peace instead of dread. She dreamed of nights where, for a change, she was not silently crying beside a man who professed to love her. She dreamed of conversations filled with warmth instead of conflict. She dreamed of living somewhere she felt wanted, not tolerated. Each box she packed was a step toward the life she deserved. Every item she sorted reminded her that she was not bound to a destiny of pain. And when she looked around the emptying room, she didn't feel sadness. She felt hope. Christine had no idea exactly what her future held, but for the first time in decades, she was excited to find out. She was choosing herself, choosing joy, choosing a life where her worth wasn't measured by someone else's approval. She didn't leave because she stopped loving the family. She left because finally she had started loving herself. Mary had always seen the possibility of love being able to make it through distance, silence, or even a broken heart if both people kept fighting for it. It is just that belief that has carried her through years of loneliness, years of waiting for those moments of affection which seldom came, years trying to rebuild something Cody has long abandoned in his heart. She held on to hope long after everyone else would have let go, but holding on eventually became more painful than leaving, and that realization changed everything inside her. Part of her wanted to scream at Cody, to shake him and force him to see her, to acknowledge the pain she carried alone. But she learned long ago that raising her voice would not make him listen. He stopped listening to her years before he admitted it on camera. She could feel the moment he withdrew, not physically, but emotionally. He became polite instead of loving, distant instead of present, formal instead of intimate. She would speak to him and see his eyes drift somewhere else, somewhere she no longer existed. Conversations became empty, filled with practical details and surface-level updates, never feelings, never vulnerability. The emotional connection that once tied them together slowly evaporated, leaving her holding strings that led nowhere. The hardest part for Mary wasn't that Cody no longer loved her. It was the way he pretended she should somehow be content with friendship. Friendship was the consolation prize he offered, as if she hadn't given decades of loyalty, as if she hadn't raised children within a family she sacrificed her soul to support, as if she hadn't endured heartbreak that would have destroyed most people. He offered her crumbs and expected gratitude, and for a long time, Mary accepted them because it was better than having nothing at all. But deep inside her, something started to shift. It started with a quiet ache she couldn't explain, an ache that whispered, "You deserve more." At first, she ignored it. Then it grew louder, and eventually, it became impossible to silence. She realized that by continuing in this marriage, she'd become a shadow of herself, fading into the background of a family that no longer included her. She watched Christine leave, and something inside her cracked. She watched Janelle grow colder toward Cody, and something inside her woke up. She watched Robin's tears become the center of every conversation, every decision, and something inside her broke. She was no longer part of the story anymore. She was no longer part of the family's emotional foundation. She was tolerated, not treasured, and she could no longer pretend that was enough. Late at night, when the world was quiet, Mary began writing letters she never meant to send. Letters to Cody filled with words she couldn't speak, not because she lacked courage, but because she already knew he wouldn't listen. Writing became her way of surviving the grief. Each sentence held a truth she had swallowed for years. Each paragraph released a piece of pain she had carried silently. The first letter was full of anger, the second full of sadness, the third of regret, but the fourth was different. It was filled with clarity. It was the letter where she finally admitted to herself that the marriage was over. She didn't write it to hurt him, she wrote it to set herself free. Every line was a goodbye that she had resisted saying out loud. She wrote about how she missed the man he once was, the man she believed he could still be. She wrote about nights crying in silence, about days smiling for cameras while breaking inside, about the confusion of loving someone who no longer loved her back. She wrote of forgiveness, not for him, but for herself, for staying too long, hoping too long, believing too long. But she also wrote about something else, something she hadn't felt in years: possibility. Even though she didn't know what her life would look like without him, she knew it did have to be better than the life that she was living. The loneliness was unbearable, not because she was alone, but because she was alone while still technically married. She felt stuck between loyalty and survival, between history and healing. Leaving would hurt badly, yet staying was destroying her spirit bit by bit. What hurt most was knowing Cody did not see her pain as urgent. He saw it as an inconvenience. He spoke to her with the tone of a man who believed he was doing her a favor by acknowledging her at all. Every attempt she made to fix the relationship was met with indifference. Every time she asked for clarity, he offered confusion. Every time she asked for love, he offered distance. The feelings reported in this chapter are subjective and reflect Christine's interpretation of events. Mary realized she had become invisible, not because she wasn't enough, but because Cody no longer had room in his heart for her. It wasn't until the night she accepted truth that the tears didn't fall. She felt something so much deeper in that moment, a sense of deep, calm acceptance. She sat on her couch, reading over the unsent letter, and realized that she no longer needed his validation. She no longer needed his apology. She no longer needed permission to move on. She didn't him at all. This acceptance didn't come out of bitterness. It came from grief finally completing its cycle, from strength she didn't even know she had. Miri had endured emotional exile long enough. She had spent too many years waiting for a man who was already gone. She looked around her home, the place where she had prayed and cried and hoped, and wondered what it would look like to start over. She didn't know if she was ready for a new beginning, but she was certain she was done living in a painful ending. That was the moment her courage began to grow. It didn't roar, it whispered. It whispered in her ear the same way it whispered to Christine, "You deserve more." And for the first time in years, Miri believed it. Mary woke up the next morning feeling different. Not healed, not free, but lighter. Acceptance has a way of doing that. It doesn't erase the pain, but it removes the weight of denial. For the first time in years, she wasn't waking up wondering what she could do to fix her marriage. She wasn't rehearsing conversations in her head, hoping she could say the right combination of words to unlock the version of Cody she once loved. She wasn't praying for a sign that things would get better. Instead, she opened her eyes and realized she didn't need signs anymore. She needed change. But even as she felt a growing sense of peace, there was still a sadness lingering inside her. Leaving a marriage isn't just walking away from a spouse, it's walking away from the version of yourself that believed in that union, supported it, and built a life around it. Mary had devoted decades to a dream she no longer believed in, and letting go of that dream felt like letting go of a part of her identity. She wasn't just grieving Cody, she was grieving the woman she had been for most of her adult life. She moved slowly that morning through the familiar routines with a new kind of clarity. She made herself tea, sat by the window, and watched the world outside move along without hesitation. The world didn't pause for heartbreak. It didn't slow down for endings. Life continued, and maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to continue with it. Sipping her tea, her mind wandered to the early years with Cody, when everything had felt so hopeful, like plural marriage was going to expand love and not divide it. She remembered all the laughter and the adventures, a sense of purpose. Still, she remembered the speed at which that had changed. The moment Cody's attention went elsewhere, he began to choose others over her, and she was background noise instead of a partner. It was painful, but finally she could. The marriage she mourned had died long before she ever acknowledged its absence. The letter she wrote, but hadn't sent, was one that Mary kept returning to throughout the day. She didn't know what to do with it yet. Give it to Cody? Burn it? Save it? Part of her felt that its sharing would bring closure, while another knew nothing said would change his heart. Cody had chosen his path long ago, and it didn't include her. Sending the letter wasn't going to heal her. It would only open wounds he had no intention of tending. The letter wasn't meant for him. It was meant for her. Later that afternoon, Mary found herself thinking about the other wives, about their journeys, their pain, their decisions. She thought about Christine and how everybody had reacted to her leaving, how some judged her, some questioned her motives, some doubted her strength. But Christine didn't waver. Christine didn't shrink. Christine chose her own happiness, and Mary couldn't deny the transformation she saw in her afterward. Christine's glow wasn't just joy, it was liberation. And for the first time, Mary wasn't envious of it. She was inspired by it. She wondered if Janelle felt this too, if she too had moments when the silence was heavier than the love. Janelle had always been practical, grounded, strong in ways Mary admired. But even practical women reach their breaking point, and even the strong could only bear so much emotional neglect. Mary knew that more and more with each passing day. They were women trying to make their way through a system never designed to protect their hearts. And then there was Robin, the wife who became, by design or default, a symbol of imbalance, the one Cody protected at all costs, the one whose tears changed the direction of family decisions, the one who became the center of his world while the others faded into the background. Mary didn't hate Robin, not really, but she could not deny the resentment that had built up over the years. It was not jealousy toward Robin's relationship with Cody. It was realizing that her marriage had been sacrificed to feed it. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she'd been in emotional exile for years. She'd hung on, out of loyalty, out of fear, out of hope, but none of those reasons were enough anymore to justify the pain. She deserved more than to be some kind of memory in Cody's life. She deserved more than to be a name on the family tree. She deserved love that showed up, not love that made excuses. With dusk settling over the day, Mary went for a walk, something she rarely allowed time for. She needed to clear her head, to breathe air that wasn't heavy with disappointment. A cool breeze brushed against her face, and for a moment she felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. It reminded her that the world was bigger than the pain she was carrying. There were places she hadn't been, people she hadn't met, dreams she hadn't allowed herself to explore. For so long, she had put her entire existence in a box labeled family, even when the family no longer had room for her. As she walked, she replayed the last few years, every awkward conversation with Cody, every cold interaction, every moment he'd made it clear she was no longer a priority. She remembered the moment he admitted he didn't consider himself married to her anymore. The shock, the humiliation, the heartbreak, she had carried all of it. But tonight, as she replayed it, she felt something new. Distance. She could hear his words without feeling her heart shatter. She could picture his disappointment without wanting to fix it. She could remember her own tears without drowning in them. That distance wasn't numbness, it was healing. By the time she reached home, she felt steadier than in years. She walked through the door of a house that no longer felt like a prison, but a place she could finally reclaim. She did not know exactly what her next steps would be, moving, rebuilding, rediscovering herself, but she knew this much. She was done waiting for someone else to choose her. She was done trying to revive something that was already gone, and she was done believing that staying made her stronger. Leaving was where her strength lived now. That night, Mary picked up the letter one last time. She didn't add anything new, she didn't cross anything out. She just folded it gently, put it in a drawer, and whispered to herself, "This is goodbye." Not that dramatic goodbye she once imagined, not that confrontation she once feared, just a quiet, internal farewell to a marriage that ended long before she walked away. And in that instant, as she turned out the light, she felt something she hadn't felt in decades: hope. The morning after Mary placed the letter in her drawer, something inside her felt undeniably different. It wasn't confidence, at least not yet. It wasn't excitement either. It was a grounded awareness, a clarity, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm finally passes, when the air smells cleaner and the sky looks wider. Mary had spent years trapped in emotional turbulence, hoping for breakthroughs that never came. But now, for the first time, the storm inside her had quieted. She wasn't healed, but she was steady. And for the first time, she felt the strength to face her life without shrinking. She didn't say anything to anyone about the letter. She wasn't ready for that part. She needed time to process her truth in private before she was ready to share with the world. This wasn't just a breakup. It was an end to a belief system, a dream, and a marriage that had sculpted her entire identity. She had been the first wife, the foundation, the woman who once believed in plural marriage with her whole heart, the woman who welcomed others into the family because she believed it was God's will. The woman who believed unity was stronger than individual desires. For her to now acknowledge the dream had failed felt like a betrayal to a younger version of herself. But it wasn't betrayal. It was evolution. Over the next few days, the little things started to change for Mary. She spoke more kindly to her own heart. She smiled, and she wasn't forcing it. She began to take small steps toward reclaiming herself. Steps that most would consider insignificant, yet felt monumental to her. She reorganized her home in a way that suited her, rather than the family's expectations. She cooked meals for herself that she enjoyed, rather than what she thought others wanted her to make. She allowed herself to rest without feeling guilty for it. She ceased trying to look okay, and instead allowed herself to simply be. But despite these small victories, the emotional battle wasn't over. Memories still flooded her mind, some beautiful, others painful. She remembered the early days with Cody, before the fractures appeared. She remembered how deeply she loved him, how much she trusted him, how wholeheartedly she believed they were building something sacred together. She remembered the joy of becoming a mother, the community they once had, the sense of purpose she felt in a family built on faith. Those memories made letting go harder, but they also made staying impossible. She couldn't keep chasing a version of Cody that no longer existed. One afternoon, Mary sat with her journal, something she hadn't done in a very long time. She wrote of her fear of starting over, her fear of judgment, her fear of being alone. But as she wrote, she realized something important. She had been alone for years, even while married. The emptiness she feared was something she had already survived. The loneliness she dreaded was something she had endured day in and day out. If anything, leaving might finally give her the chance to fill her life with people who wanted to be in it, rather than people who tolerated her presence. Her mind shifted to the children, hers and the others. She worried about how her decision would affect them. She worried they would feel caught in the middle. She worried they would see her as abandoning the family. But deep down, she knew the truth. They loved her enough to support her happiness, even if they didn't fully understand it. Many of them had witnessed her pain firsthand. They had seen how Cody spoke to her, how he dismissed her, how he acted as though she was an obligation instead of a partner. They weren't blind to the emotional fractures. They had grown up in a home where their mothers were often hurting in silence. And then there was Cody himself. Mary didn't hate him. She didn't even want revenge. But she needed distance from the version of him he had become. He was no longer the man who made her feel valued. He was no longer the man who turned to her for comfort, who shared dreams with her, who saw her as an equal. Instead, he became someone who blamed her for the emotional disconnect he created. Someone who used her mistakes as excuses while ignoring his own. Someone who pulled away and then acted surprised when she felt abandoned. Someone who claimed he wasn't married to her while expecting her loyalty anyway. For so long, Mary had internalized his words, believed she was the problem. But now, she saw clearly. Love cannot survive when one stops nurturing it. A marriage cannot thrive when only one person is willing to fight for it. She had spent years fighting alone. Over the days, Mary began to dream of all that could yet be. All big, overwhelming possibilities, she thought, but exciting nonetheless. She envisioned traveling more, reconnecting with friends, expanding her business, creating a home filled with warmth instead of tension. She pictured herself laughing freely once more, not brittle laughter to which she had grown so accustomed, but genuine laughter that came from living authentically. She pictured herself loving again, not necessarily a romantic partner, but loving life, loving herself, loving the version of Mary that she'd lost along the way. One evening, at sunset behind the mountains, she had walked out and felt a wave of peace settle upon her. The sky was set aflame in shades of gold and orange, reminding her that sometimes endings could be beautiful too. She stood there in silence, the breeze wrapping itself around her like a gentle hug. It felt like a message from the universe, reassurance that she was on the right path, even without knowing where it might lead. She thought about the letter again, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Writing it had given her clarity. Keeping it unsent had given her control. The letter wasn't about Cody. It was about reclaiming her voice. For years, she felt silenced, overshadowed by the louder needs of others. But now she knew she didn't need permission to speak from anyone. She didn't need anyone's understanding to heal. She didn't need closure from the person who hurt her. She only needed truth, and she had finally allowed herself to embrace it. That night, Mary made a quiet decision. Not a dramatic announcement, not a sudden change, but a promise to herself. To stop waiting for Cody to be someone he would never be. To stop apologizing for wanting love, respect, and partnership. To stop shrinking in the presence of a person who did not value her. To stop carrying guilt for a marriage that had already ended. She would choose herself. It wasn't the final goodbye yet. That moment was still to come. But it was the start of a new chapter. A chapter where Mary wrote her own story instead of being written out of someone else's. A chapter where her voice mattered. A chapter where she mattered. And although she still felt the echoes of heartbreak, she also felt something else: readiness.